Hey, what's going on, folks? Welcome to Paradigm Shift. Let me turn this music off. Let's see. Let's do that one here. Great, cool. Hey, continuing the conversation. I'm not sure where I was on that. Anyhow, we were talking about communication and language and how it affects and our ability to make things happen better in the world and whatnot. So we've got sorry, I just sitting down with this and didn't quite get my stuff together. I was talking about the differences in how so the today's topic is going to be the boy, I sound like a crackhead, don't I? Did you know I've had over 70 concussions? This is the truth, so bear with me. Buzzwords, that's where I'm getting to, and how that creates confusion in communication, because we have, yesterday I spoke about Duggar-Kruging effect, and I showed you how I've experienced it myself with my professional artwork and skiing, but here in the industry, we can have people come in and start utilizing buzzwords because they hear a scientist talking, or they have someone who has vast 20 years in the industry utilizing jargon terminology, and they want to sound like they're in the know. Right. And so they're going to start utilizing buzzwords completely in the wrong way. And they're going to pick up some sort of argument about why we use these words. And they're going to start emphasizing because they want to have a voice and be heard and be part of the industry. And anyone who's been around for a minute has seen how that all works. For instance, at the Canacons and what we call Chads showing up and trying to convince people to come either deposit their capital with that company, or you have capital coming in and you have people who really haven't got the experience to run an operation, that we're utilizing all this language to secure a position that they were able to play with other people's money. Okay, and so we see there's these huge losses that occurred, and today's backdrop is a little smaller. That's where I'm going to work to. And so last week, or the last episode, I started reading something off my Instagram account, and I'm going to start with that. And then I'm going to free flow out of there. I don't really have an outline other than to continue this conversation. One thing I'd like to ask now, and ask again later, is I see people in the comments, regular comment session, that I can come back to and answer questions or continue the conversation in the comment thread. I would love to have that happen. I'm doing this as it says. I think this is going to be a title of a new show, is Paradigm Shift, right? And just looking at different perspectives of how things are, and taking out of that what I refer to as groupthink. Somebody pointed out possibly there's no such thing as groupthink, but there definitely is groupthink, and it happens on all sorts of levels and all sorts of industries, all sorts in religion, politics, and just sitting at a party, or like there's a huge thing that it's really subtle, but it gets people killed, is groupthink in winter mountaineering. Okay, when we're dealing with avalanche danger, right? This is a severe one, and right, you have that's a whole nother level of when I started winter mountaineering, I knew I wasn't an expert, and I knew I had to just be scared to death of the mountains, and give them respect. And I went out and did some pretty crazy 10-day solo mountaineering trips, right? I survived all that. And I learned from the old guys I met on that trip. And I still teach people the stuff I learned from those guys 30 years ago. Literally was teaching people about what I call grip wax skiing. Okay, you've never heard of grip wax touring, have you? Where you don't use skins, you don't use the lift, you put a wax that sticks to the snow, and you have different waxes for different temperatures. So this gets back into the different genres and the different phases of reality. Different people do different things, right? So, the main topic is cannabis for this channel, or I got my other channel there where it's going to be completely different. But for the Future Cannabis Project, what I'm really looking at when I tell these stories and these anecdotes is to show you different perspectives, the way to perceive how we all interact. And that's where we set our paradigm shift. The paradigm tends to be just like where you're stuck in a way of thinking, right? And everyone else comes in and you have this is how it is, this is how it is, this is how it is. And then when we say about stepping out of the box and things like that, that's the paradigm shift, or even crushing the paradigm. And that's always been one of my themes, is to just crush people's paradigms and have them like the phoenix. You look at things in a whole nother way with a different bright set of colors after it's burned down. World was different when humans thought the Earth was the center of the solar system. Yeah, and we also thought that we were the center of creation, and there was a lot less of us. And there was at that time there was also like authorities that would kill you if you pronounced anything outside of the paradigm, right? Like the Inquisition, things like that, right? They would kill you for doing science. So give me a second here. I'm going to pull up my Instagram, and I want to read you guys where I was reading the other day and lost that. Oh boy, where am I? I need to go there. I need to go there. I need to go here. And cheers. So to my own page, I need to tend to questions there. How's everyone doing today? I think the standard question, what y'all smoking on, Wake and Bake? I'm going to be puffing a little Ziggy Stardust here in a minute. Here we go. So it reads like this. This is where I was reading the other day. I wrote an outline for an article maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and I've been looking for that, and I can't find it. I think I've tossed it cleaning up. But describing the phenomenon that is a pet peeve of mine, the improper use of specific linguistics out of context of their intended linguistic niche. There are huge differences in the language of science and the common language. Taxonomy is a specific means of naming plants. The names reflect several possible denotations selected, but they are based in very specific attributes. And that refers to, it doesn't matter what the plant is. It could be the name, I've mentioned this, it could be a name of an explorer or something like that. It could be the name of the scientist, but they're looking at things that attribute it to a genus. They're looking at things that attribute its physical structure that you can see with just a 10x lens is the traditional way of taxonomy. And we're looking at all the different flower parts and all the different plant parts and the fruits and things like that. That's how we determine the difference in one plant from the next. So taxonomy can include a person's name, such as there is thousands of plants with Linnaeus as part of the taxonomy. That's Cannabis sativa L. Linnaeus is the guy that named that. He's the father of modern taxonomy. So it's the Whipple and Fremont are also people's names using taxonomic designation of plants. Fremont was the leader of a mapping party exploring the West, right? And he was a government, sent these guys out, and they're just like all in the ancient times, you know, they always had some sort of scientist on the boat when they're out exploring, and the same with the foot parties. Okay. All sorts of good ones. Hi, Nowhere Man, back at you. So much of plant taxonomy, let's see, I went through, here we go. Much of plant taxonomy consists of the description of specific plant attributes that set it apart from the species. Species are able to inbreed for the most part, and genuses not so for the most part. In traditional taxonomy, we use visual attributes that require no more than a scalpel and 10x lens to identify. Modern renaming of taxonomic classification is done at a genetic marker level, right? And so we get a whole lot of people saying that sativa and indica, or just sativa, it doesn't have a meaning anymore. And this is where I want to touch on context. And I'm going to emphasize this, the context of the use of the words. Okay. And again, the higher structure of scientific down to the common tongue, it makes a huge difference. And because we have a laboratory doesn't mean that common language goes away. And I'll do some parallels about that after I do this reading. Let's look, for instance, at softwood pines, and this is one of the parallels, and I'll do another one with corn and tomatoes real quick. We have a common language, conifer or pine tree, Christmas tree, yet these have great diversity, from long 5-needle yellow pines to single-leaf pinyon pine. Then we have fir, spruce, and false fir, aka pseudosugum and zizii, or Douglas fir. Yet in common language, it's all a pine tree. Cedars, junipers, and even arborvitae get lumped into the common tongue. A carpenter would know that they are not the same because he has categories that he works with and the structural differences. He has soft pine, fir, spruce, tamarack, Doug fir, and redwood, all structural class for construction. And with different uses in structure, or not, you can't use redwood building structure. Okay, not all species specific not all species specific or using scientific terms. Then a carpenter might grade the boards how knotty it is, not common language, but an industry jargon, common, prime, etc. All right, so I need to find where my comment is to continue this. Now, hardwoods do not figure into construction industry until we get to finished work. But we still have grades: common, prime, naughty, stain grade. Again, industry jargon, not common tongue or scientific applicable knowledge. If we look at a forestry production nursery, we will see name tags consisting of codes delineating parental lineages and never a common name for a plant. Sometimes even named as a cultivar for its ability to resist a disease. All this is numeric and letter codes, straight science talk. But the common consumer of wood, it's a pine tree or it's a hardwood, it's a board, right? Any scientist who insists the general public uses very specific coded language is delusional. It's different language, different context. We can break down the lumber species by their chematography, aka naval stores. If you don't know what a naval store is, that's like turpentine or shellac. Oh, shellac's from a bug. But the different things that we used to coat wood with. Let me cat in here. And so these are very specific and very different pine trees and stuff, and even different cultivars of specific pines, right? They're going to have different abilities to produce these resins and stuff, right? Literally, the word resin that we use in cannabis is derived from what we have for violin rosin, right? It's the same kind of concept. We're expelling essential oils, all right, and it's become a solid. So where was I at there? So naval stores, and classify them by their ability to produce resins in industry use in fine arts. And so yes, I use naval stores in fine arts as well. But this does not remove the relevance of the taxonomic designations. It merely provides another means of communication, another linguistic tool. My pet peeve derives from the use of jargon and science language out of context, insisting these be used in common tongue. It is a form of riding a high horse. Imagine a pipe welder who insists you speak in terms of carbon to nickel ratios and flux components, or a theoretical astrophysicist requiring us to communicate mathematically in light years scale. Okay. Then people who really don't understand these language components see them as buzzwords and use them to sound as if they have knowledge, yet there is lacking full understanding. People who hated me for the way I talk about fire because I have an understanding of fire on a molecular and thermodynamic physics level. Most people who use fire daily are turned off by the basic equation of C6H12 H2O6 plus 6O2 plus heat goes to form heat, light, CO2, 6 CO2, 6 H2O. And as soon as that CO encounters an oxygen, it becomes an O2. It's just fire, aka rapid oxidation at high temperature. Understanding the scale of appropriate language versus insisting others abide by a language we don't even use daily. It gets confounded when scientists rarely talk science to lay persons and don't know how. So again, I'm really coming back to how do we utilize things with like I keep hearing people saying sativa and indica are irrelevant or don't use them anymore, and it's just, to me, it's just profoundly stupid to say that. Use them in the right context, and people who understand what they're saying on a higher level or don't understand need to ask and say, hey, what do you mean when you say that? All right. So I think some other parallels we can do, like I mentioned the lumber. Let's look at tomatoes, right? Everyone, a tomato is a tomato, right? You buy a red tomato at the store, and very few people know what an heirloom is. But there's people like me who are freaks about heirloom tomatoes, and we have 50 or 100 different varieties, right? And then we look at how when they produce, and we're heirlooming these things, and we're looking at the attributes and the flavors. And I had a girl come up to me one time at farmer's market, and people say it's like these aren't commercially viable, they're not. And the same thing with, like, for instance, land race, right? And I do a parallel with the heirlooms to in land race and commercial cannabis versus land race cannabis, and so definitely the guy selling the bright red cardboard tasting tomatoes, the visual consumer has dialed in on, because people have been literally trained consumers. You might not realize this, but you are a trained consumer, right? And you're looking for like that perfect flawless piece of fruit or whatever it is. The same thing we can look at today's cookies packaging, right? And they'll show you the scale. You see all the exact same little Mylar Ziploc packaging, right? People are trained to that consumption standard, right? Everything being identical, okay? And so this guy was selling those tomatoes, and they didn't have a name for that tomato. It was a scientific code designation for the polyhybrid of multiple varietals they found in a university that resisted disease in a greenhouse and produced these perfect, all exact same size clusters and they could just cut the cluster off. Okay, so there's hundreds, if not thousands, and they put out new varieties of this every single year. These different coated tomatoes that are used in industry production, right? But you go to Home Depot and you buy a tomato plant, you might see a little bit of that, but there, for the most part, you're looking, am I getting a beefsteak? Am I getting an early plant? Am I getting determinate or indeterminate? Those are whole other different names. It's still a tomato, Solanaceae, right? And that's the species name. Okay, and so it doesn't change because it's a Cherokee red or Cherokee purple, or it's still the species is the species is the species. Zaya maíz, there's another one. Okay, corn is corn is corn is corn, is it? But we have field corn, we've got sweet corn, and in the sweet corn you get into all those crazy designations because they're breaking down and finding individual plants and they're designating them for the disease resistance and all that stuff. And we're going there with cannabis, right? And right now we have all these names that we apply when somebody hybridizes. Quite often we're inbreeding quite a bit without really knowing where things are going. And there's nothing wrong with that where we're at, because we're just breeding stuff. All the people in their homes are doing this, right? We're making these combinations. Some of it's just doing this though, right? But corn, right? So I've been breeding corn, and I'm going to grab a couple of years to show y'all, but it's based on, anyhow, we have field corn. We have field corn that's been, like we're saying, is disease resistance inbred, right? We've got traditional sweet corns. People will have what they call Indian corn, but that's through ignorance of understanding there's flint and there's dent, and some of those different colors actually have different purposes in the food usages, right? So there's definitely all these different things of corn, and so like we just call it corn, right? Popping corn, totally different from a flower corn, totally different from a sweet corn, totally different from a field corn, right? And then even feed corns, there's different kinds of feed corn. So these are all comparable as we move into having science available to us and advancing our industry. And so one of the things is this huge set of talk here, and we're going to evolve it into other concepts as I go. But what I'm really trying to say is sativa and indica have their place still, and being and saying this doesn't apply is just wrong. Okay, so we have I described the bell-shaped curve distribution of, for instance, what's used in the industry today, and the majority of everything that's in industry is pretty much in the system, right? And so from that's what's getting studied, right? Is everything that's in matrix primarily, or whatever system you've got. And so that's a teeny little part of the entire group of what's available in the cannabis genome, right? There's nothing I have, as far as I know, is in the system. I was gifted a few clones a year and a half ago, and top-notch clones. I have the GMO, I have the Rainbow Sherbet 2, of Gelato 33, peanut butter souffle, and what was another one? A grape pie, right? So I've those are like the only industry standards I've ever had from clone in my entire life, right? And I see what they are. I understand. I'm able to grow them side by side with my own work. There's volume versus the amount of THC and outliers, right? And so why are these cut onlys? Because there are outliers, right? And so we have distribution on a bell-shaped curve or any histogram, and you have your main distribution, and from there, and so I've shown the bell-shaped curve, right? Standard bell-shaped curve. I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how. I think I need to use an app to. I'm still learning how to go live on this stuff, but eventually I'm going to get to where I can show you charts and stuff direct. Anyhow, so right, most tomato growers don't know what determinate and indeterminate is, right? And so here we have these scientists expecting that the common cannabis consumer might understand the 5 types without having access to chematography, right? And so it's a disconnect from reality. And so what would be nice is to find a way that we can get that language to come down and not be that disconnect, or it gets more confusing when you're trying to be buzzwords and push it back up and everything. So I read that and lost my train of thought. It's all right. Distribution on the bell-shaped curve and outliers. Right, all those cuts, those cut onlys, those are the outliers, right? The main distribution, you plant 100 seeds, right? And you've got the majority of them are going to be in that bell-shaped distribution zone, and then you're going to have outliers, right? And so you have standard distributions are how many? You have 100 of them in the first, so you got 25 in the middle, you got 25, you got 25, so that's 125. So whatever it is, 20, right? So you got 5, and so you have standard distributions out. And so the outliers are the ones that are out on those flat, well, there's not very many of them. So you have number versus distribution and or attributes, a standard curve like that. And I know that's confusing me. If you've never seen this stuff, I'm sorry. And that's the entire point I'm making here. Okay, I'm trying to describe how like a scientific term into plain language without even a visual. And so that definitely makes the point that like when there's confusion, and if you don't understand the histogram or what an outlier is, right, and you start using these words, and so people start saying the cut only is the way to go, and for you, that is, for people who do that, that's awesome. Okay, so but again, that's just a little distribution off to the side, and then again, so the amount of here's the bell-shaped curve of various types that are being used in common usage. Again, it's these polyhybrids here. But we have the original landrace and first pybrids are still used, and then you have landrace and wild stuff. Very few people utilize those, but they're still in the distribution of consumption and use. And again, it's context as to where you're saying cannabis or sativa and indica are irrelevant. They are completely irrelevant studying polyhybrids in a science zone, right? And understanding the chemotography, people who are studying the chemistry do not give a damn about the structure of the plant besides the actual fluorescence, right? But what I'm doing, I'm looking at structure on a whole different level because I'm not breeding for industry in a perfect environment. I'm breeding for people who have a mindset of sustainability. All right. And so we can find those outliers that produce those incredible amounts of frost on them still. And if we're breeding with a different intent, yet keeping that kind of stuff in line. Right. And so, my desire in my breeding is that everybody can put a seed in the ground and not hardly ever tend it and still get a top shelf result. All right. And so, right, there's where does a type system tell us what the taproot's going to be able to do? It's not. And so we have to keep these languages separate in their own niches and figure a way to so we can say like and I don't even know the typing system because I don't have access to chematography. And so somebody can send me seeds that says this is the type this, and I grow it out. I got no way to know if that's accurate or not. I do not work with hemp anymore because that's like it's all a guess to me, and I can't give someone a hemp seed and say this is hemp without knowing, right? And so it's quite exclusionary, right? And so and then somebody brought it up. I think recently I saw someone talking about like, hey, I'm a hemp farmer. Where does your typing get into talking about whether this is good for seed, oil seed, fodder, or does it get into? So we have all of these separate designations of where and why we use this terminology. So it's like I don't want people to think that I'm insisting you have to say sativa and indica in a scientific setting. That's not at all what it is. But these words have actual meaning and usages, as well as the rest of the scientific taxonomy that's been presented. And until we've moved to the next level of taxonomy, which is a gene sequencing level, and I've said this several times, I need to confirm this with Dr. Anubis of Schwabi about what I understood her saying was that she saw over 300 specifications, and the way she's worked with genomic species identification on other plant varieties in her previous work. So that wasn't her work as a doctorate. And again, that was just a quick blip that I heard her say. And so, really that's going to be a whole nother profound Pioneering. Oh yes, pioneers. That's why I put the ragdolls for the thumbnail here today. Is the pioneers, right? We are pioneering in this industry still, right? We're in the infancy, straight up, right? It's still more prohibition than not, still. Okay, and unless we have some medical systems, but here in Utah, it's exclusionary, right? It's very we have some of the highest priced medical cannabis period, and there's a couple of places that range higher than us, but that's there's exclusionary to access into the system, right? The majority of the people who are brought in to do the jobs in the 7 legal grows are pretty much all from out of state, right? They didn't, and all the money came from out of state pretty much to run these operations, and they're kind of failing the state's people. They're not producing enough. It's ridiculous. So there's anyhow, so I didn't do an outline today. I really wanted to continue the discussion about where we use these terms and why they're appropriate in the places they're appropriate and not necessarily appropriate to other people, right? So again, I met a fella out cross country skiing. He starts telling me about his wife who is like on these crazy pills. I know I just learned about these pills that they're feeding them out like candy in Canada. And I can't remember the exact name of it, but it's not even a painkiller, but they're prescribing it for pain and all these other things, right? And this doc this is really one of the things that set me off on this kick too. It's the same doc. I almost put him on my channel because he has saying so much great stuff. And then he just flat out in the middle of this talk goes, "Oh, by the way, sativa and indica are irrelevant anymore." And I was like, "Oh man, no. You're doing research. It's irrelevant to finding solutions for medical problems and polyhybrids. But in other realms, it's really, we should be actually looking at some of these base sativas from Africa, not as polyhybrids, but so, like we were talking about the hemp latent viroid issue and all of the cuts getting passed around, right? And I presented, it's like, hey, you're going to find the resistance is going to be in a land race somewhere. You really ought to get these things into the system so you can start researching them fully and properly. And so when we have these blinders on, this is where we're just right here in the system, but the rest of there's so much more to be found. Y'all getting what I'm saying here? I'm not really trying to say you just think about, you can't just replace these conventions. A whole nother level of confusion once we get into the legalese, right? And now we have a literal chematographic separation in language. And so unless we have defined these specific definitions that everybody knows and uses in context, there's really the only other way you can communicate universally through languages, like saying we wouldn't speak Latin to try and communicate between English and Spanish, even though there's override to these things. Math. If you can take everything and put it in a math syntax, and that's where I like graphs, because graph is a visual mathematic equation, right? And so dichotomous keys is another great way. Something I'd like to throw out there, and I just don't have the energy, time to, or even I'm not around the chemographic space, but people who are in that realm, this would be an amazing master's project or even a doctorate, is to put together a dichotomous key for the chemotyping that people are presenting and saying in 1 through 5, right? There's a whole nother section of identifying stuff that besides the chemotyping, and if we understand the origins of where the chemistry comes from and the various developments in the landscape and the earth, right? So there was this interim, maybe before, I'm not exactly sure when the narrow leaf drug type versus the type 1 through 5 come up, right? Or if that was kind of synonymous or they bounce off each other. So we have the narrow leaf non-drug type, the narrow leaf drug type. We have the wide leaf NLD, whatever. So we got those ones, and they're not sufficiently covering everything. Sativa and indica doesn't sufficiently cover everything. You throw in ruderalis and chinensis and these different taxonomic designations. They don't necessarily cover everything we want to have in our discussion. So we take it up to the next level, and you've got this narrow leaf discussion, or we have the chemo type discussion, right? I had presented a whole other thing where we're typing seeds. Those don't overlap at all, right? But if we all have an understanding of math, we can communicate this stuff in between and up and down. So where I was leading to there is the next level is a dichotomous key to discern if there's any way we can possibly make this happen for people who don't have hematography. What are the parallel aspects that we can find in there? Like, so if I want to find out if something's got CBD in it, it's straight anecdotal for me, right? I have to smoke it and offer some to my patients and ask them. Okay, heading back to, this is one I cited from reading. So I met a new patient skiing last week, or his wife was on these crazy drugs. She has a very similar broken neck issue to me. And so we're discussing, and this guy, no clue. So where I live here, like half the population is Mormon. They don't drink, they're teetotalers. And now that cannabis is not against the law and they're seeing that it works for medicine, they're interested people, right? But not any knowledge or understanding whatsoever, right? So this guy didn't even know what a sativa or indica was. So we're talking about, somebody said, isn't describing sativa and indica long-winded? Shouldn't we use subset A, B, C, or whatever? And I'm like, I've never heard of subset. Is it going to be less long-winded for you to describe what those subsets are than that we just agree what sativa and indica is? Okay, so maybe those are a great way to describe it. I'd never seen that, and so we can have that discussion. But this guy was like, his biggest concern was, can she drive after putting this topical on? Can she drive after eating one of these extremely lightweight THCA FICO raw capsules that has less than a tenth of a milligram of THC in it, right? Or THCA even. Okay, so like this is my concerns when people are saying you can't use that language is irrelevant, whatever. It's like, there's people who have zero knowledge whatsoever who need this medicine, and we still need to be able to communicate to them. And part of my process is like asking, like, have you used cannabis? Have you not? If you have, what are the results from the different kinds? Do you know the name? And we, you know, as a provider, a medicine man, I've got to make sure I'm helping this person to the best way possible, that the plant's going to get a great return and they're going to have an excellent result and response, right? And so again, this goes to utilizing the right language in the right time and place with the right people, making sure we understand and not just say, I have greater knowledge than you and you're using that word wrong, okay? Because as I pointed out with the word "to," right? What did I just say? Was that a number? Was that you? Was that, right? And again, so the two little I's versus the two big I's. We don't use Roman numerals in common language anymore, do we? But they are part of an outline, right? Whether it's the book outline or the table of contents, or if it's a scientific paper outline, right? Those, or if it's part of the indices, okay, those are the appropriate uses of that letter. If we're writing a book or a paper, we have the Arabic numeral 2, and we have the letters TWO, right? And they both have appropriate usage in writing. They're not used in the same place, right? Okay, TOO, right? I pointed this all out. These all have, and then we can utilize deuce, we can utilize pair, we can utilize binary, we can show 2 dots. All of these represent the word "to," okay, in their proper context. So that's one of the best ways I can explain this whole, you know, alongside with the parallels of tomatoes, corn, and trees, that like, you know, what's the skiing's the same thing. We're just swinging that big old, I got the biggest, okay? And I'm over that, right? I've broken my neck skiing. I've jumped off the cliffs. I got the awards, and I know what I was capable of doing. And like I said, I stopped and spoke to people who was their first time on skis, didn't even speak English, and did my best to get through the language barrier to show them the very simplest motion of sliding on snow so that they had enjoyment. And I just want to break down the barriers of communication from that top end down to the bottom end. And I kind of wanted to have something I was going to lead into the next. I guess I'm going to go into on my next paradigm shift, I'm going to start moving towards its dry farm talk. And you can see, if you look at the playlist, I have Heart of Year drops here at Future Cannabis Project 2. I linked over to my own page where I did my first live stream, was about dry farming, and showing that I have plants growing in the sub 20s, the low 20s here, that are seedlings and surviving. And so I'd like to get people really thinking about that sustainability stuff and moving away from the excessive inputs we put into industry production that are completely unnecessary. I'd really like to figure out how to put my live, put some photos onto here, because one of the things I'd like to show, and I've shown, you can see a little bit here and there, but photos of my sacred farrow grow where I bred my hardcore, and these trees with trunks like this, where I literally throw seed out on the side of a desert mountain, and you got colas like that. And it's in a north facing slope without a whole lot of direct sunlight, right? I didn't feed them anything. They've got snow melt, a couple of thunderstorms, and the desert sun and wind, and produced big, beautiful, stinky, frosty colas that anyone would be envious for, even in industry. So yeah, that's I kind of think where I was headed today. I'm going to go ahead and, how is sprouting seeds in the low 20s sustainable? It happens on its own. There's absolutely no energy input to it. It does it. It's natural. That's just it. It's doing the natural thing. That's how it's sustainable. You don't got to put a refrigerator on. It's the fact that it can do it, right? That's what it does in the Himalayas and in up in the walking corridor, right? In the Tibetan plateau, or the stuff where it literally, and it grows on its own. You don't have to do all of this stuff to make it happen, especially if you're just doing extracts. Okay. I'm not sprouting the seeds. The seeds are doing their thing. Okay. And the majority of plants out there, we've babied in a nursery, all this breeding projects, so that people are like, oh, I got to keep my bud seed alive. And that's the way it's been. But what's happened is we've bred out the ability for a taproot to run, or the ability to sustain these particular cold temperatures. Those were pure Hindu Kush that I was showing that's going on with, right? They developed at 18 to 20,000 feet up in the walking corridor in the Hindu Kush mountains. So they literally, someone was asking in one of the shows about creepy crawly habits, and that's totally normal up there, where it looks like a vine cruising across the ground. And then there'll be a little fluorescence and little low, but it'll like crawl down a cliff and stuff like that. So there's all these different aspects that like industry has no freaking clue about that these plants can do. Is plant even a living thing? Well, where's the DNA? So there's your answer. Where's the DNA and the RNA? And so I'd say the plant's a living thing. We have a huge amount of microbiology in our own systems, right? It's like we're like as many other cells as we are human cells. Yeah. So with that whole thing, I've been trying to show people, it's like if you look at what Azarian, whole nother side I missed. We're talking about the different narrow leaf designators and stuff, and this is one I want to touch here. So Azarian came up with Indian Landrace Exchange came up with the whole concept of he took the narrow leaf, wide leaf concept and drug type and whatnot, and then expanded it to global lateral and elevation zones, right? And I'm not so sure if he put longitudinal, but lateral, so north to south, and then elevation zones, right? And so in our discussions over the years, and just doing the stuff that we do in observations, it's pretty obvious to people who really look that all the different separations, the various terpene profiles, and the ways that the trichomes form, and whether they're dry or oily, and then if they're just a sessile stalk, or if they actually have a large swollen head, things about the way the inflorescences grow and stuff. Those are all originally derived from the landrace natural selection processes dealing with the local weather and climate and associated pest regimes. Okay. And so, like all the chematography of polyhybrids, it gets kind of confusing unless you can understand the hybrids and the land race. So, if you have that larger viewpoint of what came to get these things that we're studying that are in the system, you're going to have such a better comprehension and understanding and overall view of what's going on in that chemovar or chemotype. When it gets hard when we've inbred stuff and people just slap new names on it and steal stuff and put names on it and everything. But as we get further into having available, looking at the genome, right? We get more companies like what Phylos was doing, where they showed us where the relationships were in the universe, right? That kind of stuff, understanding that bigger picture. And that's not something everyone's going to do. That's a big picture, right? I keep the shit in my head and I don't write it down. I got busted in 87 and they used all my notes, meticulous notes. My grandfather kept meticulous notes and I kept meticulous notes until that point. And I've never written a single thing down since then. I scratch a few notes when I'm going through 60 plants just to say which one's got what form or what smell and things like that. But that's never going to happen in a scientific place, right? Doing what I do, I'd have 10 people working for me and taking notes, doing the watering, keeping everything perfect, right? But I'm a madman in the desert in a cave with a rock over my head, doing my own thing. So, yeah, let's see. Kind of think that kind of wrapped up sort of what some other thought that I had that I wanted to put in that thought stream. I was kind of talking about the wild plants. Yeah, so Azirian talked about that elevation, the highlands, lowlands, narrow leaf, wide leaf, right? And so all those things, there's different ways of looking at the picture, looking at the bigger picture, whether it's chemotype but again, so you don't have access to radiochematography. Chemotyping is pretty much irrelevant. Sounds great. It's nice to know. But totally having these other higher concepts doesn't negate or take those ones out of place, right? What was some of the talk? So I discussed on the last episode about how sometimes the doctors get in there, or the professors, or even just like I was just studying Bachelor of Science and I can get into a bubble of my own thought process about fire, right? And so this can happen here in the cannabis industry. And then people who don't really have understanding hear these words and use them as buzzwords, trying to make it sound like they have knowledge and understanding when they don't. And that confuses other people because their words get misused. And so it's just this is the whole, the first two paradigm shift episodes. That's basically the concept of it, is that like, hey, if you think we're using the word wrong, clarify and explain, have a communication, and we can always just respectfully disagree from our different perspectives. Okay. And it's a big world out there. And this is just my viewpoint from where I'm standing in the world in my shoes. I'm not necessarily right for anything other than my own perspective. Okay. And that's one thing I love people to try and really understand is like, I've got this perspective that's very, very different than anyone else's. And this is where paradigm shift starts, is looking at different people's viewpoint of the reality of things. There's one. So on my personal channel, I've got someone telling us that land races in equatorial Brazil look like vines too, right? Isn't referring to narrow leaf or wide leaf even less accurate than sativa or indica? It can be, and it depends on our language. This is gonna be like a whole show I need to do once I figure out how to do charts and stuff and show and put them up here where you see the picture instead of me. And but I want to break down all of the different possible uses in the proper context where these words, simple and complex, can be used and create literally a chart of so people can visually see, like, oh, in this context it means this, in this context it means this, right? Just like the word to. The most, if we're going to insist on words because they're confusing, never be used, fuck. That word has infinite meaning, and it all depends on the context. And nobody's going to tell you you're wrong. And we can joke and try and diffuse when somebody's using it aggressively and turn it into a joke, right? And diffuse it. But we all know in the context it's being used in what the word fuck means. It no longer has any original meaning to it whatsoever, right? And I think there you can look it up. There's actually somebody did the etymology of it. And when we were kids, we thought it meant for unlawful carnal knowledge, or fornicating under the consent of the king, right? And where did that word exactly come from? But now it means all of these things, right? So, if we can utilize fuck in context correctly, I think we can manage to utilize sativa and indica correctly in proper context and not lose our shit over it. Anyhow, with that, I'm gonna finish up with a little burning sage, and with gratitude for everybody taking the time to learn, and continue the conversation. That you can't see it. There's a little smoke coming off of here, and that gets rid of the evil spirits and bad ghosts. Burn a little sweet sage, and yeah, appreciate y'all. I'm just looking to see if there's any more jargon. Oh, okay, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I missed that little section, jargon. So we have I kind of touched on this on episode 1. Jargon is specific terminology based in, utilized in, and I touched on this earlier in the show too. Specific language used in a niche of an industry, right? So I talked about it in the last show about a carpenter has very specific, I talked about today and talking about pine trees. There's very specific language that a carpenter uses referring to wood, right? And grades of wood and things like that. But that stain grade doesn't necessarily transition over into the laboratory, right? And then those specific, like the jargon for laboratory for the nursery would be like a 2 and 2. Okay, a 2 and 2 tree. If you're working in a nursery, you would know what a 2 and 2 tree was. But if you were a carpenter, you would have no fucking clue what I'm saying when I say a 2 and 2 tree is. And what a 2 and 2 tree is in a nursery is you've root cut and you've top cut the tree twice. You can have a 1 and 2. You can have a 1 and 0. You can have a 2 and 0. You can have an 0 and 2. Okay, so those are all going to have very specific meanings. That's jargon for the nurseryman that someone buying a board's never going to have a fucking clue about. Okay, so that's jargon, right? In cannabis, it's kind of like what I'm trying to say is chemotyping is jargon. And until we have common language that we can translate that into, that's a very specific niche, trying to figure out what that chemistry is that you require as a laboratory to be able to do it. So trying to replace common language with jargon that requires specific advanced technology to be able to determine is just, in my mind, ludicrous, right? So yeah, that's that jargon. And then people who are new to an industry will pick up jargon and throw it around as a buzzword, right? And that gets even more confusing because they have knowledge of the word, but they don't have understanding of the word. So that confuses everything. Right. So yeah, no, I'm glad that it's not necessarily overdrive. It's just talking a specific. When I'm freeform talking, I'm like trying to pull this stuff out of this huge. You've seen that thing. It's like the things that are the things I know I can communicate, and the things you're going to understand. Okay, but when someone asks me a specific question, I can definitely go, like you said, into overdrive and push that information out. I noticed this quite a bit for myself. If I'm in straight free form, it's a little slower, a little more trying to grab that thought. But this goes to mnemonics, right? It takes a little bit of a trigger to set a thought off. That's how people used to be able to like just read the Iliad or the Odyssey. Actually, not read it, but recite it, right? Or the Vedas, right? And these huge texts that this is the crazy thing. We have the capacity as human beings to memorize these 3,000-page books. Every one of you. How's that for a paradigm shift, right? If you understood the word mnemonics, study aids, right, and how they did that, how they memorized those things that had to do with the cadence and the flow, but it also had to do with one thought triggers a memory of the next, and they're all compartmentalized in our brain. and this is how our mind works, right? And this is one of the reasons it gets all confused, because we have these perspectives of reality, but we don't understand ourselves at all. And these people used to really know how our brain worked, and so they could memorize these things and pass it on. And it actually preserved knowledge better when you had to memorize it. For instance, the Druids, right? For thousands of years, they passed on their knowledge and never wrote it down. And it was more accurately passed down that way than you could possibly pass it down by writing it, and people reading it and misunderstanding what they read, or editing it, or updating it to their perspective. So, yeah, so Codex, as soon as I'm done talking, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning again. So, cool. No, you can, and you just have to understand how it works, right? I can't remember names, and that has something to do with my, I have to write them down, right? And once I write a name down, it's gone through a whole different memory pathway. But one of the ways I studied, you just do bar tricks where, like, everyone pick a word, sit into the bar and write it down in a list, right? And then you put the list there and you make up a little story for each of the words, and you can just come right back out and say them forwards and backwards in like a 2-minute memorization section, right? At 15, I went to brain camp. I went to military camp, I went to brain camp, and I went to dairy farm for 2 months. But the brain camp taught me all sorts of this crazy stuff, how you can literally memorize things, even being severely dyslexic like I am, when you have the trigger point. And so one of the name mnemonics that people say to use is to, like, look at somebody's face and think of an animal and associate their name to that animal. That one never worked for me. People don't look like animals, they look like human beings. I'm looking at the time here. We're running up to the end of the hour. That's the longest I ever wanted to run one of these things. I believe it. He carried that Bible with him too. So we're talking about John Muir over here, could read the whole Bible by heart in the Old Testament, and or most of the New Testament, the whole Old Testament. I believe it, right? And it's not that hard to do, especially when we didn't have TV or flash. Right? That's our life now, is this imagery. And I'm trying to make these videos and doing 20-second cuts on the video, and that's too fucking long for anyone's attention. They need these 3-second cuts. It's nuts. But that's where our brain has gotten to now. And we don't memorize anything. We are now cyborgs. We now have this thing, and anything we need to know, we can just ask the question, and we've got 5 answers we got to go through and figure it all out. So one of the things about names I think about is, like, are we reincarnated? And I actually, like, have this entity soul name, like, in my entity soul name. And so when you tell me the new entity soul name, I got no fucking clue. It doesn't stick because I know you in a whole nother parallel universe is light beings. And that's one I just had a thought of recently. So cool. Appreciate y'all. I'm going to sign off now. Peace out on you. Have a great day. Happy growing. I hope you learned something. And if I upset you, please send me a note and let's talk. I have no problem with people contesting my ideas. That's how we build the community and the human race, is through communication and these kind of dialogues or whatever. And even this isn't even dialogue. This is just me kind of spewing my psychosis out at you. So peace out, folks. I'm going to shut this one off. And